Hey y'all, I'm Catherine Rossen.
There's a Netflix documentary on 3M that I haven't had a chance to watch, but it's really impacting the stock. That's why it's
I hadn't had a chance to watch it either, but I did see that was what was moving it this morning.
Yeah, I mean, what's going on with 3M, the fine company that my father repped for, 30 years, this Teflon story is, it's buried in the footnotes of 3M, but it's becoming very prominent as something that 3M has to worry about worldwide. It's a DuPont Teflon. It's not. They're going after 3M, not DuPont. But top of mind for me is that the stock just doesn't stop going down. And then the second thing I'm thinking a lot about is trying not to let it impact me too much, but the craven nature of the NBA. After a very prominent, many people think the best general manager in the business, Maury came out and said, "Look, he sides with the protesters in Hong Kong," and immediately he was shut down. He had to pull that back, and I just am kind of amazed that there's not more of a backlash here. That this man didn't do anything courageous. He came out in favor of free speech. I mean, kind of Jeffersonian, and what the founding fathers were in favor of. And immediately the large interests in basketball, who are billionaires, said, "No, that's going to hurt our business." And he was sacrificed, Maury, and maybe he won't keep his job. I urge Americans to follow this story because it shows you exactly why the president and Elizabeth Warren have felt that our policies themselves, not the Chinese, but our policies have been to sell out the working people and sell out the people who are people who work American companies that have been decimated by the Chinese. And you kind of see it at work. I mean, one of the things that Elizabeth Warren talks about is basically the oligarchs in this country who are willing to sacrifice the workers on behalf of making more money in China. And bingo, there it is, right there. So, I mean, I think that one of the reasons why Senator Warren is so resonated, and I know that there's lots of polls which say Biden's coming back, whatever, is because, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but she would not want the interests of the protesters in Hong Kong to be sacrificed on the almighty dollar. But that's kind of what's happening. And I think it's a great metaphor for the times. I urge people to follow this story. Follow this story. This is a tweet heard around the world and then pulled back by a prominent the most prominent general manager who I guess he had a fit of conscience. And that was perceived wrong.
So guys, I'm Catherine Ross. Standing beside me is Jim Cramer. Jim, based on that, I think that's a very poignant point that you just made. And I was watching this story develop all weekend, and one of the things that really stood out to me is, the NBA, of course, wants to encourage free speech, but then their statement in Chinese said that they kind of walked back that statement.
Look, the Chinese, obviously, the biggest story in trade right now is the Hong Kong protest, because the Hong Kong protesters have been relentless, and the loss of face by the government of the PRC is huge. Because they can't seem to put down these protests. What will they have to do every weekend they're snubbed. People just feel like that President Trump is snubbing them. Well, that's ridiculous. But see, the narrative of the media is to not understand that we've done nothing in favor of the protesters. And now we find out that big money is against the protesters. Big money's allied with the PRC against the protesters in Hong Kong. And so they get sacrificed. And I think I urge people to follow this, because if you go back to President Trump's statements about who should be protected, it's us, the working people, against China. And if you go to Senator Warren's statements, it's even more vociferous about protecting the working men against China and Chinese pollution and Chinese and religious persecution, free speech. So you've got arguably a putative presidential candidate for the Democratic Party in favor of the protesters. I don't want to put words in her mouth again, but that her policies would indicate. And then you have the billionaires who own NBA teams against free speech. And I think that it's really too bad that they just want that market so badly that they really cave and crave. Craven.
Let's continue on the vein of talking about trade, though, because you penned a column this morning over on Real Money that broke down the 7 principles that the White House is looking for in the trade talks later this week.
I mean, maybe I'm just an anachronism. Maybe I am. But all the principles that the president wants, like, do we want fentanyl coming in? No. Fentanyl that's poisonous. Do we want the companies, our companies, to be compromised by their companies? No. Do we want cyber terrorism? No. Do we want subsidies by the Chinese government to Chinese enterprises to wipe out, say, our steel industry or aluminum industry? No. Do we want anything that involves true technology transfer? And I urge people to go over the Micron lawsuit against the government, the Justice Department against the government of China. Like, the 7 deadly sins that the president is fighting for are at the heart of what the Chinese don't want to do. And said over the weekend, remember on Friday, Larry Kudlow said there's good hope for talks, and then the talks have to revolve around the 7 deadly sins that Peter Navarro put out. And then as soon as this weekend, as Larry said that, on the heels of that, the Chinese government said, listen, we're not going to address the 7 deadly sins, which is that's the broad outline of talks that the president wants. So I don't know what comes of it. I don't think the president wants a small deal. The president wants a big deal. So the Chinese, I think, once again want to default to helping the farmers, believing that the president will be craven and just want the farmers to win the election. And I keep coming back, and I'm just going to be a broken record on this, that Elizabeth Warren is tougher on trade than China, than President Trump, because as a precondition to all talks, she wants Paris Accords, and she wants religious freedom, and she wants a level of respect for our country that the Chinese would never grant. So the Chinese I keep hearing in the mainstream media that they're going to wait out Trump. If you think that Biden's going to win, then that's right. The Chinese are definitely going to wait out Trump. But if you think that Warren's going to win, holy cow, the Chinese are making a major misjudgment. But, look, she's very vocal about what she believes in. And if you read her manifesto, it's against the Chinese. And I think people are really, in Beijing, they're really betting the wrong way. That's one of the reasons why I keep saying that they better hope for a deal with Trump, because it's going to be far worse with Warren. Warren does not care about the billionaires. She's against the billionaires. She believes that there's oligarchs, that we are a country of oligarchs. And I think that, hate it or like it, there is something to be said about it. I mean, last week, in a really seminal town hall, Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook talked about this issue and how he's giving away almost all of his stock because he feels that you have to look into your conscience and say, well, don't the billionaires have enough? And the NBA decision says the billionaires deserve even bigger billionaires.
So obviously, Jim, based on everything that you just said and more, there's so many moving parts for investors heading into the October 10th trade.
I always default to earnings because it's non-political, and I default to Costco, where that stock opened down, then went up, and that was wrong. I default to PepsiCo, which had a blowout quarter. I default to Merck, which was at 79 when you and I were last talking about Merck. It's at 85. I default to companies. Now, individual companies are heretical to the current dominant ethos, which is you shouldn't own individual stocks. And I keep coming back and saying, well, do you think that you should own Nike, or do you think you should own the S&P? Do you think you should own Merck or the S&P? And I keep saying that if you can have both. That my stance is that you can own both individual stocks and the S&P. The people who proselytize the S&P feel that my stance on owning individual stocks is wrong and heretical, and I think that they're so wrong. And it's interesting that I'm perfectly willing to have the bedrock be index funds and then own stocks, but they're not willing to say the bedrock should be S&P and then own stocks. They're not. They're hard line, and I question whether they too are driven by greed. Just craven.
Jim, based on all the conversations that you
had here, what happened here? That the stances that I'm calling for are stances that might hurt your earnings a little bit, but are good for the average person. but there is no representative for the average. I tell you, damn it, I'm going to be it. If I can't do it, nobody can. I'm fortunate enough to be doing well enough in life that at least I can speak up for the average investor.
All right, so based on your representation now of the average investor who's watching our show right now, we're looking at the October 10th trade talks. They're obviously going to rule the market this week. But what should they be looking at? Just earnings, just paying attention to the stocks in their portfolio?
Yes, I mean, we're about to be on earnings season. There are trends underneath. The best performers are the utilities and the REITs. We did a big piece on the REITs for Mad Money last week, and just be aware that's not a healthy sign, and you need broader. You need a broader suite of stocks going higher, but that could happen because there's a lot of companies. Look at PepsiCo and Costco are representative of consumer packaged goods and retail, and they're both really positive. But if you look around on the floor, this is more representation of the individual investor. Right here. You see anybody?
Very empty.
Yeah. I mean, you could put this place in unfortunately, because I love it here, but you could put this in a very small room, kind of like the size of my apartment.
You could put it in your apartment?
I have a nice sized apartment.
Couldn't put it in my apartment. I got a Lower East Side apartment. It's tiny.
You do. Look, when I first moved here, I had a Murphy bed in the studio at East 44th. You work long enough and you keep your nose to the grindstone and be honest. I think you still can do well in this country.
All right, so Jim, Uber is real money stock of the day today based on a Citigroup note that came out this morning that boosted it from to buy from neutral.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there's at a certain point, maybe Uber is going to become more than a cab service. That's what you're betting on. I've been a big proponent of Uber Freight. If you go over the Costco quarter, which is a seminal quarter, they talk about how freight costs have gone down. No one paid any attention because all they cared about was tariffs. Freight costs are coming down in large. I think maybe a lot of it is Uber Freight.
Yeah, and the analyst did.
A lot of new drivers, particularly Hispanics and Sikhs, which have been shut out for whatever reason, perhaps discrimination, and they are on Uber and they can drive trucks backward, forward, and it's very good.
And the analyst did cite renewed revenue growth as a potential for them. But Jim, what's it going to take for you to pay attention to Uber?
I need to see some sign that Uber Eats and Uber Freight are needle movers. And then I'll feel like there's more to it with the company and it really is an ecosystem. You needed to see more than just a car company. It could be ecosystem, then that's worth buying. Interesting to see the bank stocks up today. I'm trying to figure that out.
Let's talk about the banks over on Action Alerts Plus, which is where we're heading now.
Good.
All right, thank you for joining us, Jim, and thanks as always for all of your insight. If you're watching on Facebook Live or on TheStreet.com, we are now heading over to our Action Alerts Plus Daily Rundown show over on ActionAlertsPlus.com. I'm Catherine Ross, and we'll see you tomorrow.